Oh boy, today we have a complex and controversial topic. Buckle in. Grey resellers. So, everybody thinks that buying a game is simple. You just click buy on Steam and it's yours. It's clean, safe, easy. But I learned very quickly that it's definitely not clean. Now, story time. I remember showing Rise of Industry at Gamescom. We were sharing the booth with other Calypso titles like a new Tropico and Commandos games. And right in front of us there was one of the biggest grey resellers, not gonna say who. On one side, we were showing the game that we spent years building. On the other, a company that had cut into our revenue and buried us in fraudulent keys that was just smiling and handing away free merch like nothing ever happened. I needed to glance over more than once and I was getting pretty sick. So, some context. There are some stores which are official partners with contracts and paperwork and all that good stuff. Then you got the ones living in the shadows, moving keys like they were poker chips and convincing players that cheaper is always better. It's not exactly piracy, but it's definitely not legitimate either. And they hide behind the language of being just a marketplace rather than a seller, as if that somehow excuses everything that goes on behind the curtain. Us developers have been vocal about the problems for years. Stuff like stolen credit cards used to buy keys, chargebacks that wipe out revenue, and fraudulent codes ending up in players' hands. All of them are well-known complaints. And yet, despite all of this, these resellers still manage to present themselves as legitimate business, complete with the aforementioned booths at conventions. So, to the average player walking by, they just look like any other gaming brand. So, that's the contradiction. Developers sit there wondering how people that got the game in shady ways can bury them in support tickets and undercut their sales at the same time while being treated like first-class citizens at the very same event. And I've tried to have people explain it to me for years and I really still don't get it. Because to me it feels like the guy that crashes your wedding not only manages to get in, but also ends up hosting the after party much better and with a bigger budget than you ever had. The funny thing is that everybody knows who they are. Everybody knows how they operate, and yet still they are. Still invited and still smiling for photos. And that's a gap on the grey market. The difference between perception and reality. For players, it's just a cheap key. For developers, it's weeks of wasted time, lost revenue, and problems that never should have existed in the first place. Now, to understand how the grey market exists, you need to know how the game keys are actually moved, because they don't just appear out of thin air. Every code starts out controlled, with very clear rules about who can sell it and where it should go to. On the clean side, you've got the authorized stores like Humble, Fanatical, and Green Man Gaming. They get the keys directly from publishers and sell them to the players, and the money flows back to the people who made the game. If you buy from them, you're safe. Your library isn't going to vanish overnight, and the studio will get paid. Then you got the bundles. 10 games for the price of a sandwich. You buy one, but you're stuck with another 9 that you're gonna throw in your library and you're never gonna touch. We all got those. It kind of feels like a gym membership that you feel good for having it, but you're never gonna go. Still, bundles are legitimate, and publishers use them to wring a little more value out of a back catalog or build awareness, and sometimes even to support charity. But where it gets messy is with promotional keys. Now, you have review codes for press, influencer keys for content creators, and even curator keys for Steam reviewers. Trusted platforms like Keymailer can send out 1,500 keys in a single blast. So if you're wondering how many influencers are out there that apparently have 1 million subscribers but no real audience, well, judging from my inbox, all of them. But it's not just Keymailer. Every release triggers a tidal wave of curator requests, which means hundreds of emails every single day, most of them from people with no real audience. And some of them exist only to harvest the keys and flip them. And the irony is that the content creators you actually want are not gonna cold email you for codes because they're busy making content. Instead, you are the one that needs to reach out. And here's the critical part. Promotional keys are not stock. They're marketing tools. So if Valve catches your keys on a third-party site, they can limit or even revoke your ability to generate new ones. So yes, the legitimate system works. Publishers control the keys, authorized sellers distribute them fairly, and developers get paid. But every time there's a gap, the gray sites jump in. And to the players it just looks the same because, hey, a key is a key. You paste it in and the game unlocks. You don't see whether it came from a publisher deal or from someone who decided to game the system. Now, let's get dirty. Gray resellers don't just cut into developers. They damage the players as well. Ever bought a cheap key that suddenly stops working? Keys bought with stolen credit cards get revoked when the fraud is discovered, and suddenly you have a bunch of players left without the game they paid for. And the forums are full of stories by confused players blaming developers for something the reseller caused. And then there's the amazing Steam account trick. So, instead of a code, you're sold a login credential to a throwaway account with just one game in it. Looks like a bargain, but careful, because it's completely against the Steam terms. And if Valve cracks down, you don't just lose that one game, you can lose all the library. And these are not just isolated cases, as developers have been documenting the fallout for years. For example, Mike Rose from No More Robots shared how Descenders was hit with more than 1,000 chargebacks in just a few days, which meant thousands of dollars gone, weeks wasted in fraud management instead of supporting the game. And a famous one is Tiny Build, that went public when Punch Club and Party Hard were bled by gray sites, estimating hundreds of thousands lost. The post obviously went viral and sparked industry outrage, but somehow the resellers are still around. I even lived it with Rise of Industry. The payroll money vanished into chargebacks from stolen card purchases, and we needed to spend days chasing fraud instead of actually improving the game. But the financial hit is just the start, because gray keys fail more often. They get revoked and break with region issues. And when that happens, the players are not gonna complain to the reseller, they complain to developers. They flood our support inboxes with super fun and friendly tickets for problems we didn't create. And reviews as well take a hit, because gray resellers change who plays your game. They're gonna attract the wrong audience with the wrong expectations. And when those players bounce off or get burnt, the backlash shows up as negative reviews, and that drags down your visibility and poisons long-term sales. And this is why developers of Darkwood said they'd rather have people pirate their game than to buy it on a gray site. Because piracy, at the very least, doesn't generate chargebacks, support nightmares, and poisoned review scores all at once. So, fraud is usually the first thing hit, and reputation is the second. When stolen credit cards are used to buy keys, the chargeback doesn't fall on resellers, they fall on publishers and developers. Now, again, for a small studio, that can mean payroll money gone overnight, but the insult on top of injury is that those same keys often get revoked later, which means players suddenly lose access. And regional pricing also takes a hit. So take a $60 game in the US, that can cost $15 in Argentina, Russia, or other places so that the local players can afford it. And it's a system designed to make games accessible across different economies. But resellers, of course, exploit it by siphoning cheap keys and flipping them globally. And the result is very predictable. The publishers had to lock down the regions and restrict transfers and make access harder for everybody. The very system that was supposed to make games more affordable ends up shrinking, and legitimate players are gonna lose out. And then, the emotional toll. When players slash prices during sales, put together charity bundles, or hand out review codes in good faith, we see those same keys pop up on authorized marketplaces. And honestly, it feels like your generosity has been turned against you. That even when you try and play fairly, someone else is just cashing in on the gap you left open. And over time, it wears down trust and makes studios second guess everything and the very practices that players actually value, like sales, bundles, and giveaways. Somehow people still wonder why I'm so cynical and bitter over the years. But now, a weird point. Nostalgia. We've all been there. I wanted to replay an old favorite from my childhood, and the publisher just pulled it because of, I don't know, expired music licenses, or it just wasn't worth maintaining. G&G hasn't rescued it yet, and suddenly the only way to find it is on some resale site. On the surface, it feels like a harmless exception, like it's that one time that the grey markets are filling a gap nobody else will. But that's exactly where the resellers thrive, because they take that very same frustration and use it as a gateway. As one classic title makes the whole marketplace look trustworthy. And once you normalize the storefront, it's just a small step from buying an old game that is unavailable anywhere else to grabbing a new one. Because, hey, look, that game is just 20% cheaper than Steam. So the danger isn't players chasing nostalgia, it's the resellers weaponizing it to make your business look legitimate, even if it's built on fraud, loopholes, and exploitation. Which brings us to the real cost. The damage doesn't just land on the studios, it lands on the players as well, with fewer updates, stricter region locks, and even games pulled from sale. And look, I get it, the games are expensive. Personally, not even I just pay the full price myself most of the time, because there's this as well trend of 70 or even $80 for a game. So I rely on sales and bundles and legit discounts from stores that are legitimate. And they let players save money without gutting the people that make the games. But the grey resellers are different. They're not just gonna skim the revenue. They're gonna create fraud, leave players with revoked keys, and flood our game into the wrong hands. And when the audience bounces, the damage shows up in reviews that are gonna drag down the visibility and even less money. So the choice is simple. If you wanna save money, do it in a way that doesn't bleed the people actually making the games. Wait for a sale, grab a bundle, or buy from an authorized partner. That way, the deal you get doesn't come at somebody else's expense. And if you want to go deeper into how this industry really works, that's how I made the GDE Discord. Yay, it's plug time! So, it's a space where new devs and old veterans can share the real lessons of the industry without the sugarcoating, because I believe that the only way to fight back against systems like grey market is with knowledge.
Knowledge.
And knowledge spreads best in communities. So, links in the description if you want to continue this conversation. I'll see you there.